Hey there viewers, and welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the reassembly phase. So all your parts should be clean at this point. Your crankshaft should be clean, your measuring should be finished up. All of your instructor checks really need to be finished at this point in time. So if that's not done, make sure those get done before you proceed on to this point. So this video is going to be the crankshaft installation into the block, which we're probably just going to do last, but most importantly, we're going to go ahead and install these cylinder jugs. So you're going to need the following parts that you can see in front of you. There's the jug, the appropriate piston, valve springs, the valves, the keepers, and of course some type of an assembly lube. Your valve lap should also be finished by this point in time. So make sure I get those signatures again, and that your valve guides are clean, you know, with the pipe cleaner thing that we did. Again, I have already done that. You've already done that. You've already seen that. So not a huge point in rehashing that one out in this video. Let's get started with assembling this cylinder jug. All right, so step one, I'm simply going to take some clean motor oil and no real set amount, and just flow it down through the valve guides. Okay. Step two, or I'm just going to refer to that as next. We're going to grab our two valves, like such, and I'm going to get a little bit of lubriplate, and I'm simply going to smear that all over the valve stems, just for a little bit of lubrication. I think the motor oil kind of thins this lubriplate out a little bit, which I like for this particular application. Again, use the assembly lube of your choice. Okay. The next thing is we're just going to flip the jug over. Sorry, it's pretty tough to film because it's like inside an engine. And you're going to put the appropriate valve into the appropriate cylinder. Everything should slide around nice and easy, almost like it's floating on a cushion of air. If there's any grinding whatsoever, you need to pull your stuff back apart and get it cleaned up. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put a thin coating of oil onto the cylinder wall. And what that's going to look like is just a little bit of oil, and I'll smear it around with a towel. And this gets any trash that was kind of clinging to your cylinder wall, gets that out of there, and hopefully gets a nice coating of oil in that crosshatch pattern. All right, next what we're going to do is we're simply going to put your hand up, bottom of the jug, and you're going to put your two valve springs. So each valve spring is identical, so there's not an intake and an exhaust side. And then you're going to put your two keepers on. You can pretty clearly see how that works and looks here in the picture. There you go. Very nice. All right, our next step is simply going to be to put a little bit of motor oil on our piston rings. I'm just going to throw a towel down underneath that, and we will spin them around. Nothing should be grabbing, nothing should be, catching. Your fingers should stay, nice and clean, things like that. And we're simply going to orient our, let's smear some on the side here, the piston, obviously, as well. That goes without saying, duh. Anyway, you're simply going to orient your piston rings like such. So you got the solid black piston ring with the M, it's either an M or a W brand on the top. And it's got the chrome kind of face in there on the bottom. And then the second ring is chrome all around with black on the top, probably a Teflon or something. And it's installed with its brand name facing up. So that's kind of a Honda tradition there when you take these things apart. I'm just going to do, because my oil ring is a kind of a traditional three-piece normal high tension ring, is I'm just going to make sure nobody's lining up with any piston pinholes or anything like that here on my oil control ring as best I can. So I'll put this guy here about there, not quite 180 degrees out. I think Honda specs 120, but you get the general idea. All right, folks, your next job is going to be to break out the ring compressor. So it's this steel collar, probably seems like a snap-on something or other. Smells expensive. They're not really that expensive. And what this collar does is it cinches down around the piston and compresses your rings so that you can slide it really easy into this jug. Now, when you look at the ring compressor, on it there are some little tabs, and you can see that in the photo here. Those little tabs at the bottom need to face the, the deck, if you will, of the block, or the part of the cylinder, so that way the ring compressor doesn't end up going into the cylinder along with the piston. So let's go ahead and get that installed. Okay, so here is our ring compressor. Simply gonna open that up nice and big. We're gonna drop our piston inside of it with the tabbed side facing down. And we've already oriented piston rings. We simply tighten the ratchet, okay? Kind of snug. And at this point, if you look, you'll notice that the piston is stuck. The rings are compressed inside of it. So all I'm gonna do is hold it up to the cylinder and tap this in very gently with a hammer. And by hammer, we most definitely mean rubber mallet. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pop the piston out ever so slightly so we have a little bit of it exposed, and that way everything lines up nice with the block. We're also going to take note of the FW stamp for fly wheel. So we're actually going to install this guy like this, and then very, 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 very gently, just make sure you're holding the compressor flush. You should almost be able to tap it in with your palm. In fact, you can. The mallet's nice just because it's more controlled, but you shouldn't be hearing anything pop. Nothing should get stuck. And at this point, you can see that the piston is completely installed in the cylinder. Once that jug is finished up, you're going to do the exact, to a T, same thing for the other cylinder jug. So I'm not going to sit here and record that. You can assume that that will be done, considering here's the piston that goes into the starter side jug. All right, our next job is going to be to put a couple drops of, more like a little coating of motor oil on this ball bearing and rotate it around, since that's what we're going to do. Then at this point we can simply install the crankshaft. There's really not a big need to put any sort of lubrication on the end, so I'm just going to put a little bit of motor oil. It doesn't really do anything on this engine, considering that you have a ball bearing on the end of it. The crank should not be spinning inside of the ball bearing, so the ball bearing should take care of all of that. If you really want, it probably would be a wise proposition, before you threw that crankshaft in, I see we already got motor oil in the seal, probably came from the crankshaft, but just for good measure, I'm going to throw a little tiny bit of Vaseline, because it dissolves super easy in motor oil, or lubricate. I really do not care. We'll just put that in the seal, and then we'll drop the crank in. Do make sure your flywheel key is not installed in the crankshaft at this time. So next up, we're going to go ahead and remove the two rod caps from each jug. Remember, we got to be super careful to keep those in their respective places. We've made sure we have two dowel pins, one for each jug, and then we're going to get the RTV out after we wipe everything down really nice with some solvent so that our RTV sticks good, and we'll glue both of these cylinder jugs back onto the engine. We're going to use The Right Stuff, not a sponsor of the show. This is basically mineral spirits, but you can see it removes trace amounts of trash from the metal, kind of prevents leaks. I'm going to wipe all this down really good. We're also going to wipe the jug down. Now I have a yellow dot, which is conveniently going to correspond with a yellow dot on this cylinder jug, of course. So just keep that in mind. Next up, we're simply going to apply a small ish bead of RTV around this area of the cylinder jug. And this is just to keep the oil in the engine. Don't need to go super crazy. There we go. We'll do the same on the other jug. I'm simply going to put a little bit of luber plate in each connecting rod. I'm doing this last, hopefully to help prevent a little bit of mess. We're also going to put a tiny amount on the crankshaft, and I might just remove that, smear it around. Okay, there we go. That was easy. And then we'll put the correct jug onto the correct side with the crankshaft's throw, if we can, at the bottom. That way the connecting rod don't smash into it. So all our dowel pins are in, everything's good. Just kind of gently wiggle that down, make sure the crank's not hitting nothing. And everything looks pretty good. You might need a little tiny bit of persuasion on those dowel pins, but nothing major. We'll do the exact same thing for this guy, making sure we don't, slam the rod against the crankshaft. Very gently. Okay, just turn the crank a little tiny bit, make sure it's not in the way. And there we go. All right, starting to look like an engine, yeah? So a crankshaft's not binding up against anything. It's super easy to turn. We're gonna put the 5 fasteners in because this RTV says assemble immediately. How convenient. We're gonna start everybody by hand if we can. We're not tightening nobody quite yet. So 4 little flange nuts and 1, I don't know, 2-inch approximately, M6 bolt are gonna go into each cylinder jug. Just gonna take the 12mm. Tighten these guys down kind of in a X pattern, so one side doesn't get more smushed than the other. Okay, so far everything is working swimmingly well. Not forcing anything. Come up here, I'm gonna hit this one more time, and then I got this little guy kind of hiding out somewhere down here. Well, way on the bottom. There we go. And lastly, let's not forget, just using my 1/4-inch stuff. You don't have to force these down. At our next step, it's going to be slightly tricky, but you know you've done this right when all of the bolt holes are facing down toward the bottom. So we're going to reach into the cylinder and we're going to pull, hopefully, the connecting rod down. Hopefully we can get up there like so. Push it however you want to make that happen. It is a little bit tight. They don't give you a ton of room in these cylinders, unfortunately. Okay, so there we go. And then this guy is just chilling up there. So I should be able to use the crankshaft to push that piston back up the bore a little bit, which should get the rod beautifully aligned. And then I'm simply going to take my appropriately stamped, probably should put a little bit of assembly lube in that, like about that much. And then I'll put my rod cap on. And we're going to give it the reach around, and we're going to make sure that rod cap is snapped in tight both sides. Don't use the bolts. Sorry, my hand's probably majorly in the way of virtually everything, but we're not going to use the bolts to pull the rod caps back down. Simply going to sneak up around, tighten this up with a socket. Not going to snug it or anything. We're just going to run all the threads all the way up. Once that's done, we're going to rotate the crankshaft over to the other side. I'm kind of going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to maybe push that down a bit from the spark plug hole. Be a little easier because I cannot get my big fat fingers up in there. Okay, so there's that guy. There's our assembly lube. More. Okay. And you can see our 2 dots each side. Everything lines up nice. Everything just snapped together super nice. I'm gonna put a bolt in that. I'm gonna drop it in the engine. And we're gonna put a bolt in it on the other side here as well. And we're going to double check, make sure nobody's got a gap on the end. Everything looks really good, hunky-dory and swell. So now we can apply the final torque to the rod bolts. All right, folks, well, there you got it. Bring your engine up to me, have me double check that rod bolt torque so I can make sure everything is put into your motor correctly, because it's a lot easier to fix any issues with this right now than in a couple of days, you know, or a weekend or what have you, when that RTV has had a great chance to set up and dry and get, you know, well, basically turn into glue. So anyway, at this point, everything tightened down. Your crankshaft should very, very easily, not effortlessly, but should pretty easily be able to rotate that just with your bare hands. This is a smaller displacement engine, and I believe the same diameter on the crankshaft as the 630. So yeah, I believe these engines will interchange if the orientation of them were not different. So this one's actually a lot easier to spin around just by virtue of being a smaller motor. So there you got it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.